Okay, so here we go with having a go at a gardener's still life in pastels. And obviously we've got soft chalk pastels, not the oil-based ones. But if you fancy having a go with oil-based, they're just a bit slightly different in the way that they work. But the beauty of pastels with a still life like this is that you get some wonderful colours and you can get some really lovely tones and textures as well. So what I would suggest is obviously with any composition, if you've got quite a lot of elements to it like we have here, it's just thinking about really kind of starting to just map out the general composition. And obviously if you've got a still life in front of you, the only difference is it's like some of the things that we'll put into here later on are the elements that make those things stand out and stand apart as well. And then looking at the depth of how we get the depth of the leaves and things like that, but mapping it out and just getting a general idea without going into massive detail is just really helpful. So I've gone for a light coloured pastel. I've got obviously an orange coloured background here, but you can use any colour. If you've got a white background, again, as long as you can see your pastel colour, just to kind of draw some of this out, then that's the main thing. It's you that needs to see that. But I've gone light because if you go dark, sometimes it's difficult to kind of get some of those, you know, the darker lines out, as it were. So so what I always suggest to people actually is that they go for the biggest element in the picture, because then we can work out whereabouts everything else goes. I've cut this one into a square actually, and I've cut my paper into a square. You don't have to. Obviously you can just leave some of the edges if you have this on a landscape, or you can even have it in a portrait shape. But I've just cut it square just to make it you know, fit a little bit more into the actual paper. And I've got a board which is pastel matte, so it's a little bit smoother than a lot of the papers, just acts slightly differently. But any of the pastel papers, if they've got quite a heavy grain, like a lot of them have, you might be able to see the grain through that, and that's absolutely fine. Sometimes it's nice to get a bit of texture coming through. And you'll find out as you're working with pastels whether you like that grain effect or not. And if you decide once you've had a few goes with pastel, do you know what, I'm really not liking that grain, then move on to something like pastel matte, which is a much smoother finish. But you don't really know. I like working in both, to be honest. So I've just got pastel matte today because it's like more like a card and it sits easier on the table while I'm doing the demo. So I'm going to go for this flower first. And obviously if we get the biggest element, that's the biggest area of our paper that we've got. You can use pastel pencils or the edge of your pastel to map that in. Doesn't really matter, it's entirely up to you. This is obviously a pastel pencil. They're not quite as, sometimes they're not quite as soft, although some of them, I know some of the different brands can be. So if I just for purposes just get a lighter coloured, in fact I'll go for blue on here just so that people can see. So I'm just going to pop in some of these kind of these flowers. So what I want to really look at is whereabouts, you know, how tall this part is, how tall obviously the pot is. And this is almost, you know, it's just slightly bigger than a third, I think, this pot here, and this is slightly bigger than 2/3. So if you've got a marker of whereabouts you want your pot to finish, and again we can use the edge of the paper to help us with that, can't we? So if I'm looking at this as being about a third, and my drawings are never perfect when I first do them. You can pop a bit more into it if you want to, you know, it's entirely how much you want to go into. So I'm just going to just start to get a bit of a shape of the pot. And again, like we did last week, just use, you know, you can use a pencil to look at the angle to make sure you've got the angle, you know, not too steep if you want to. Get, you know, and that really helps with mapping out, is feeling that you've confidently got that. We've got that cut off by that tool there, isn't it? And again, you know, we can more or less work out how big the pot is. You know, if we looked at that in terms of you know, halfway down our, you know, or more or less halfway across our paper, isn't it? So you can have a look at that to help you if that helps like that. And again, you know, you can look at the angle again just to make sure that you've got it's more or less there. And again, you know, once we've actually got these elements in, we can start to change them once we start using the paper, getting the colours and things in anyway. So it really isn't a big deal when we start with it. So just, you know, getting those pot in. And again, you can have leaves and things that overlap, so don't worry too much about it. We just want to get the general idea. So I would kind of go in here and think, like, well, you know, I know a lot of people say, oh, the foliage, I get all in a muddle. That's fine. Just pop in. I'm going to pop in some of where more or less where the main size of the flower is. I'm not going to work into that really. I'm just going to just generally get some of these flowers into place. And again, if you want to add extra flowers in because you think, oh, there's too much leaf, I'm not as keen on that, then that's absolutely fine to do so. There's another one that's coming out here. Now, I'm not going to do this foliage over this side for a while. I'm going to wait. I'm just going to get this foliage in that's around this area, and then I'm actually going to start to draw in the watering can, and then I'll move this foliage across just so I'm more accurate about where it goes. So yes, there's all these lovely beautiful flowers. Pop those in. You know, you can just, and then what I would tend to do is I might use the edge of the flowers to get the next area in, such as, you know, some of this leaf. Again, I'm not going to put like massive detail with the shapes. I can do that a little bit more as we go. Just using the edge of my pastel just to pop it in. And then I'll pick up some of these really big leaves here. So I'm going to go for this middle one. It comes across all the way across here with the underside of it. And it comes to the edge of this pot here. Just so that there is some, we're starting to get some shape and things like that in there. Yeah, we can change it again. And then another one, I might just get another of these big leaves in there as well, just so that we can, and we can, you know, change the shape of them as we go. And then obviously you've got a few more leaves coming behind. And just pop those in. Anything else that you can see coming behind there? What have we got here at the front? Yeah, and then we're just working our way down, aren't we? There's a couple at the side there. There's one there. And there's another one directly underneath this at the front. And they're a funny shape. Sometimes, you know, we're just going to be using our judgment with lots of different shades to work out the shape of some of these. And then there's this one that comes over the side, and it's beautiful, that one. Got some gorgeous shapes to it. And if it's a bit wiggly and you're not quite sure about it, don't worry, we can come back to that. I just want to see how far out I think it comes, and have a little go. And again, we can alter this as we go if we want to. It might be a bit more depth to it than that. Okay, so what I personally would do, but again, if you want to carry on with the foliage, it's fine. I'm just going to go and get this watering can in so that I can see how far to come out with the rest of the foliage as well, and make it all kind of work. And also then I'm not doing kind of trying to faff putting little lines behind there. If I can more or less draw that in, that's great. So I would actually use the edge of my pot here to work out how far it comes up the pot for the base. And again, you know, you can check the angle where it comes to, and you can use the edge of your paper as a guide to where it comes if you're not, you know, if not sure. And obviously it's thicker, you know, so it's wider than the pot, so we know that. And then again, the tip of the pot and this part can almost line up with other things on the page to work out how high up they come. So I would maybe be taking that just underneath this foliage here. So as a guide, got the wrong bit, haven't I? Got them different. As a guide, I just bring this over. And we're kind of guessing, aren't we, whereabouts that flower overlaps, but we can work that out. And then again, you know, we can even look at, if we're not sure about this, we can, you know, pop a line in there. It's always very helpful just to break up your picture into you know, manageable bits really. And then again, I want to look at how far this comes out. It's not quite as high up there, perhaps to here. I might even just pop the top of that in like that, and then, you know, we can look at the angle of that and just kind of just twirl it, just bring it round as best we can, and we can tweak it, you know. Bring this down as well. It gets a bit thicker, doesn't it, in the where we're going. And we've got some, you know, more of a general idea of whereabouts to pop everything. It just feels much easier somehow. So then you can start to fill in the gaps of what you've got here. So I'm going to bring out this flower now, petal flower there, and then start to work my way across, you know, get this leaf in. You can see a little bit of the under, you know, the gap through there, through the watering can. Another leaf there, and this is just, you know, just kind of working our way around, aren't we, and then getting this petal, the main kind of petal of the flower in. And then again, you've got some foliage there. We can just break up again what we've got there. So we know we've got this gap under here, so we can keep that gap under there. And then see how many. So you know, you can work outwards or you can work inwards. It's entirely up to you, really. That top leaf is sometimes easier to get in because it's overlapping. So let's pop that in there. And again, you know, tweak the shape and stuff as we go. And then there's some other quite big petals. There's a few, isn't there? Start to see a few of them as we're working. It needs to be a bit bigger. And then this one at the side. And as I said, don't worry if you've not got everything in to start with. And you might actually, I think a few people today decided that they wanted to put an extra flower in because there was too much green for them. So you can do anything like that as well. Got a gap here. Okay, so then, you know, we're starting to get some of these elements in place, so it just helps us when we actually come to doing, you know, starting it on there. So so then we're just left with the spades and things like that. So again, you can check the angle. This is the one that people do struggle with, but you just check the angle of the tool, see how far it comes up past the pot. And then start to draw in, you know, some of those other elements. It just kind of crosses over. And again, we can look at how far it comes out, because I've kind of made that really quite small actually, but if we look, it comes all right out almost, doesn't it? Look, that one, almost the edge of this watering can here. So I'm going to need to pull that out a bit. In fact, I think mine is slightly off with the, yeah, and just pop some of those. But again, you know, we can alter these a little bit as we go in as well. And then obviously we've got this on this particular composition, this last bit of spade. And again, it's just looking at how that crosses over, what's the angle and everything. This one I think is quite, you know, on first glance is tricky, but if we just use, you know, just use a little marker there, that comes up past it, we can then, you know, it makes it much easier, doesn't it, just to draw a little line. Actually, we can then get start to get some of these elements in. And again, you know, the spade here, we can look at, we almost get, even with this spade, like this little triangle, don't we? Which helps us to plan it out a little bit. And then, you know, the rest of the spade coming up. Okay, I think there's something up with my fork actually. I'm just having a look at that. Yeah, needs to go a bit up there, but we'll sort that as we go. Okay, so yeah, so we can just use one thing to work out another, which is great, isn't it? And just get everything in place that we need, and really what the idea behind it just gives you a bit more like proportion, and then it's really quite fun then is to working on the underlayers. So so when we start to obviously use our pastels, we just got to have a think about what the pastel that you're using is like with your particular paper, because they're all very different. So all the papers will respond differently to your particular pastels, and everybody's pastel set will be, depending on the brand and all sorts of things, will be very different. So some pastels are really soft and chalky and will spread quite easily if you want to blend them, and other pastels you have to, you know, you need to get a little bit more on. So the only thing that can happen, can I suppose go more wrong, is that you can end up putting too much on and it kind of scuffs off the top of the paper. You'll see it, you start to see lots of kind of bubbles underneath it. But also sometimes not putting enough pastel on makes it very difficult to enjoy the art of pastel. So it's making sure, and you don't know this till you try, so it's a good one for kind of going, right, I'm just going to give it a go and see how much to put on. And as you start to work it, you'll get more familiar with your finger and how much pastel you put on first and how much you want to blend. So what I would tend to do actually is I would go for you know, some go for one area perhaps, and go for the shade areas in there and start popping those in, like the darker tones in there. So say we started with the watering can. Again, some of the colours will be quite different, don't always come out the way you think at all. So one of the things is just testing what colours you've got, what sort, you know. So, and also you don't have to go for an identical colour to how is on here. You might have a colour slightly different. They're not, you know, they're also, the pigments are also different in them. It doesn't really matter, if I'm absolutely honest, and so quite often with pastel, the nice thing is being really led by the colours, because some of them are absolutely stunning. You know, you get real depth of colour with pastel. It's beautiful. So it's quite I think, be led by what you enjoy. It's like I'm putting this one on here at the bottom. I'm really enjoying that colour, so I think that's going to be my mid-tone. I'm going to go for this one as a dark tone. And what we tend to do is we start to build up the layers like we would do in acrylic painting, except we would go for the darker shade first, and that's so we don't get the painting muddy. So it's very easy to muddy a pastel. Sometimes that's by having a dirty fingers, which is why I was saying it's great to keep them, you know, keep them clean in between your colours. And sometimes it can be just overworking too many layers. So what we want to do is kind of just take a little bit of care. So I'm going to look on within my blue here, just see where I can see any shadow areas. And it doesn't matter if you go slightly into a leaf, because we might change it as we're going anyway, and where the shadow is. So I'm going to pop these, this is my shady area. I'm going to pop it on, and I'm just going to kind of just blend it a little bit if you're on bigger paper, it's, you know, it makes it, if you're on the smaller paper you go, you have to be a bit more controlled with your fingertip. If you're on a bigger paper, you can be less controlled because you've got more space. And then I'm going to put this darker area in here on my pastel. And again, just kind of, I don't really need to blend it as such. I'm just kind of pressing it in so that so it sticks better. And then I'm also going to, I'm looking at where else I can see it. This is a little bit shady on the underside of this, the watering can, and slightly a bit of shade as I come up here. Okay, so I'm just using the edge of my pastel to get these more, you know, these lines in. And then down here, that's quite dark and shady, but I think that, I wonder if it's the same. Yeah, it's quite a similar tone. So where the side is here, you know, often get that between two things. You do get a dark shadow cast. Especially that helps us as well. It helps us, our eye, to work out, you know, how deep an object is and how far away it is as well. So it's always handy to do. So if we, you know, get those shadows in is really important, and then that starts to create the depth between our items and creates a sense of perspective as well, getting those shadows in. And then the only other place I can actually see them, I don't know about yourselves, is I can see underneath this. I'm going to use the edge of my pastel to create a slightly that's not bit, don't want that bit in, to create just more of a kind of an edge. You don't have to have an edge. You can keep everything quite soft, because it's finding the contrast as well between what, you know, how much blendiness you like and how much line and texture. Some people just love a whole blending experience and keep everything very blendy. Other people like a bit of blend and lines, and other people just use lots of lines with pastel and marks. So I would say have a go. I think it's quite nice to try a bit of blending if you've not done it very often, but you may end up, like if your natural style is to kind of just pop lots of marks in, you may end up doing that with your pastel, and that's absolutely fine. So what else have we got here? Okay, there's a little bit of a shadow, a little bit here, but again, it's just, we're just looking, aren't we? We're looking all the time at what we can see. So I'm going to get that in there. And this is where I'll be really tempted to, you know, wipe those fingers off, because it's in between your layers. Because what we're going to do now is go to like a mid-tone, and then we finally finish off with a light color. You know, we can put the lighter layers on the top. And then we kind of put those on in a slightly different way, but we'll work our way through here. So then obviously you can go for your whatever color you've used that you really like as your mid-tone. So I was going to go for this one because I really like it. So I'm putting enough pressure on here. This is the thing, enough pressure so it goes on nicely, and I can also blend it. Sometimes it's tempting to think I don't want to make a mistake by putting too much on, so I won't put much on at all, and that can make, as I said, it can make the experience not quite as nice. So be brave with putting enough pressure on that you're getting your you know, enough pastel on there. Use it on its side, you know, and get that, you know, get a good covering, and then you can just use your fingertip to blend, you know, blend in like a paintbrush really. I'm going to pop some of these in as well. Just keep working your way through. There'll be, you know, there'll be elements you think, well, I don't know where that green leaf is. I would just say, just take your pastel where you think it, because it will be fine to overlap with green anyway, because the greens are quite dark, the base ones. So I would say it's better to get the blue where you think it is, because we can cover over it anyway with another colour, than to leave a big gap and then have to go between with your blue. So have a go at that. And then there we go. So just keep happily working away on that. Yeah, get your other tones in where you can see them, get them nicely kind of tapped in. It's lovely. Once you get really the hang of it, it's a really nice material to use, but it does take, I would say on average 5 or 6 times, I think, of using them. Some people do just take to it straight away. I didn't. It took me about half a dozen attempts, really, you know, half a dozen sessions to really get to feeling that I really loved it as a medium. I'll just pop a little dark shadow in there because I've missed that out. That's come up on over the top of it, so I'm just going to pop that in. You know, if you've got a pencil, you could use that instead. It's in, you know, that's where I suppose if you know, for using pencils, it's quite handy for getting the detail in. So we're working through this layered approach, really, is what we do with acrylics, actually. And then what we can do then is within this same thing, same watering can, we can then go in and try and pop the highlights on, because of course, you know, the dark tones help it to recede, the colors to recede, and so it creates the depth, and the mid-tone just creates, you know, the base color. And then obviously if we can pop some of the highlights on, that helps us to create the shape a little. So see what you've got as a contrasting light color. You might find that white is too bright. It's one of those things where you just can have a little go. I'm actually looking, I did have, oh, there it is, I've taken it out. I've got a light, this is actually a light blue, although it looks white on the camera, it's actually a light blue. Or you could try a light gray. You know, it's some areas are whiter, so you've got these more highlights here, and like certainly on the spade and things like that. So it's just comparing how bright. So if you think it's going to be white, just check to see if another white area and see if it's similar. And if it is, then that's fine. Now the difference between adding a top layer, you know, because we're layering up, is I'm not going to smudge this as much. I'm actually, you can do, but I'm just going to give enough pressure. So you do need to give plenty of pressure, even if you're using the side, so it goes on confidently, but also putting a bit of pressure helps it stick itself. And the reason I'm not going to do loads and loads of blending, you know, obviously this is a small area anyway, we've got some, like the highlights are more you know, the edge of something. You can make it muddy if you do too much smudging over the top, and that can make your colours muddy as well. Now obviously to create the shape you can bring some lines over it as well if you want to, you know, create some shape with it. And there's a bit there. So wherever you see these highlights, usually on the edge of something, isn't it, where it's the light's catching it. And you can blow the chalk off a bit as well, or even like tap it as well, just to make sure you've not got too much on there. So I can see a little bit of a highlight here that's creating a shape. So I'm going to just create that shape a little bit. I'm getting enough on there. And this is the difference between, you know, like keeping it, I suppose, you know, getting your artisan strokes in there, and then, you know, blending it out again. So again, you're not really going to know. I'm just not going to go too deep with the blending. I'm going to keep it nice and light. But you decide what you want to do, because you might think, no, I quite like that, I'm going to blend a bit more. You know, there's obviously personal choice is really important in this as well. So we would just do that. So that's obviously that's one particular area. And again, it might look a little bit strange at the moment because we haven't got some other elements on. So yeah, so just have a really good look through, see what you can see if there's anything else you can see in there. And then, you know, and then we can do exactly the same process for the other elements if you want to, you know. I started with that because it's in the background, and obviously we're going to overlap the top with the leaves. So I might put the leaves on next, actually, because they overlap, don't they, onto there. So I might start with some of the foliage over this side. But again, it's entirely up to you. If you feel like you're drawn to, say, the plant pot, and you want to get those different tones and layers on the plant pot, then have a go at that. We can just work through. So I'll just leave you for it. Well, I'll just demonstrate a little bit of the green, actually, because I did get asked this question a bit today, so that's be helpful too. So again, find the right green. I always have like a little, try and keep the colours that I've used fairly handy, so that when I decide which ones I want, I don't like get them all in a model, and it's just organising your colours quite like that. So the same here, I'm just going to move the ones that I haven't used out of the way. And you're just trying tones. So I know I'm going to use that one as a light tone, the lightest one. I didn't like that green at all, so I'm not using that one. That's a really good dark shadow. And then this is my mid-tone green. So I think I'm going to stick with those ones for now. You can overlay it, you can overlap them anyway. So again, I'm going to start with the darker areas. I'm just going to be a bit mindful when I'm putting these on. So I'm just going to start now, popping on the kind of a shape that we've got here. And again, it's your representation of the shape. So don't worry too much about, exactly being absolutely exact carbon copy. And then I'm going to try and get those darker areas in. If you find it easier to do the whole leaf in a darker colour, that's fine, you can do that. The thing is, we can use a lighter colour over the top on, with a bit of pressure and everything. And then we've got another one here. So you'll see, I'm going over the top of the gap that I've got here as well. So that one is quite dark inside. So I'm actually going to get the center of that really quite dark. Shows the depth of it, doesn't it, as well? So yeah, so some of this might look a bit strange again, like some of the other things that we've done where we've thought, oh, it's looking a little bit unfinished, and yeah, it will. So yeah, again, we're just popping in the dark colours. And you can work like this. You can go through the whole plant if you want to and put all the dark in. Or you can think, right, I'll stop for a bit. I'd like to see I'd like to see it taking shape. Sometimes it can be a bit like, oh gosh, is it going to actually work? So sometimes it's just a confidence boost, and also just a little bit break from it becoming more of a routine of blocking out, and just more the enjoyment of seeing it take shape as you go. So I'll go for my mid-tone now. So again, what we're looking at is not the very lightest areas and not the very darkest, but perhaps some of the shape of these flowers, shape of these leaves, sorry, because we can get the highlights after it. So just finding some of the shapes of the leaves as well. Which is all fun. I'm just working around, and this one hasn't got quite as many. It's it was quite dark inside, wasn't it? This one with a few patches, and it's just using our observation skills really as to looking at, what kind of colour the leaves are and everything. And then again, I'm looking on here to see what can I see. So, you know, we've got a few little elements there. And again, it's not quite looking like a composition yet. We've got these little elements, but it's part of when we're using a layered approach, just to kind of just keep trusting that it's going to work. And then obviously when all that's kind of pressed in, I'm going to go for the highlights now. So much lighter area. So on this plant here is just, you get those little shapes like here, that just where the bend in the leaf is, you can just get those on. And if we're using it sparingly, this is when it really does start to work. It's when we start to pop it everywhere, it can it can then start to, there's not much contrast, as it were. So then, again here, the edges of the leaves and everything, where do you get a little bit that's bright and everything? Just wherever you see a little contrast on the edge of a leaf, just kind of popping that. And sometimes you get these little lines with the lighter one as well, that bring the shape of the leaf out. Not always, but sometimes you do. So you can even, like, if you get like a little bit of the... So again, as we're building this up, we'll focus a lot less on the leaves as we build the picture up. So although we're looking quite closely at the moment, we'll probably say, oh my goodness, it's not really quite coming together just yet. Once we have all the other elements in place, it'll be absolutely fine. So we've just got to keep working through with that process. And if there's anything else, now you may see a few stalks in there, so coming along the back or whatever, if you can see that, pop it in. Again, you can use a pencil, or you can just use the edge of a pastel. I'm going to go for quite a contrast, like a pinky peachy one. I'll just see what that looks like on the paper, because again, it's not always, it's not always straightforward. So I'm just going to pop that in there. It's like just a hint, and there's something else in the background there as well. And I've noticed I've missed a little bit of blue. This is exactly what I said earlier. I was going to try not to do that because then it gets a little bit difficult, but never mind, hey. Just pop it in now. Okay, so again, we can just keep working through and getting them on, and there's no reason you can't swap about. But if you think I'd rather not do all the leaves, you don't have to. I probably would just carry on with getting the leaves in, so that then I can focus on really get those flowers. But again, you could just work your way through the composition if you prefer. There's no set way or right way of doing it. It's really down to what you're enjoying doing, really, because if you're enjoying it, that's the beauty. It was one, sometimes if you get too caught up in what you think you should be doing as opposed to what you feel you want to do, that can actually spoil the process a little bit for some people. So we've got a little bit of a yellow tone to this, which isn't really a similar, it's not quite as bright as that, so I'm just going to go for a small amount of a yellowy colour in there. Let's have a look, try that one just on the leaf there. See that work? That looks okay. Okay, so just keep working through that, and then we'll take a little pause in a moment, just to do this little bit of the leaf poking out. And don't worry if you lose your way temporarily, it does happen, because we're just, especially when you're doing the back bits of the foliage that can't necessarily see, look here. Yeah, it's quite dark is the foliage underneath, isn't it? Actually, when I'm looking at it there, it's quite dark. So yeah, so some of these bits that we're drawing in, that we're painting with our finger and pastel, we won't actually see. It'll just be going behind some of the flowers and everything. and you may have changed what you sketched as well. That often happens because when we put the first sketch in, it's not really, you know, we're just kind of trying to get a shape to it. I mean, you can get really into the detail of it and make it entirely accurate. If that's what you prefer to do, that is absolutely fine. And again, it's down to personal choice. I really enjoy the actual pasteling part of it. So I don't tend to do too much detail, because I like to kind of just focus on really the colour and everything in there. So again, we're just looking, all we're doing is we're looking at all of the different tones of these. So in here, we've got this one underneath here. It's quite dark inside it. And also you might have shape going between. Might see a bit of shadow between the two leaves as well, so you can pop that in. So that just get rid of that dust. Yeah, and again, we're just starting to pop some of these. You know, whether you decide to smudge it or not, it's entirely up to you. You know, keep working through. If there's any highlights, might not be at the leaves that are underneath as much, which is fine. Or you might just have might just be a tiny bit on an edge that you can see poking out. It's all good anyway. Okay, so we're just building this up, building it up all the time. So I'm just going to take a pause there and see how, you know, see if you can kind of work on what the bit that you're doing at the moment, and we'll be back. Okay, so we can just keep working through like this. At this point, it can feel like it's you know, very, especially if you're doing a lot of blending and things like that, you can't get a sense of where the definition and things like that is, and that's absolutely fine. So what we can do is we can tighten all those up as we go through the picture. So you can either just do it in one section that you know you've finished and you're not coming back to, or you can wait until the end and when we've got all the kind of the basic layers and things in place. But if you think, oh, I'm just, you know what, I'm not enjoying the process as much because I really need to see a little bit of definition, then just say, for example, if you've done the watering and take that, and all we need to do there is actually just use it right on the edge, so it's really fine. And you can start to pop in, because obviously, like under here, what we're looking for is the shadows. We're not doing an outline as such, but we're looking that under this side we have got a shadow. And all you need to do, you can break it if you want the line, is we're starting to carefully put those shadows back in, so you can feel you can start to feel that there is some more definition to it. Okay, now obviously if you're using the edge, it could well be you've just got to be a little bit, you know, mindful, and also you can change color if you want as well. So if you want to go slightly darker, let's have a little look. Let's see what else we could do. Pop a little bit of grey or something in there. We're just getting that, we're just kind of trying to capture the shadows, so it feels then more like there is more definition. And it's not so much, you know, it is slightly different when you're looking at where the shadows, you always get a shadow underneath an artifact like that anyway on the table. But it just starts to create a little bit more definition between things, and we can go back in. Obviously this one is more difficult at the moment, because we're still working on, we haven't got the flowers and things over the top, but you can even do that if you've finished some of the areas. Go for find your dark one. You might need to go, if you want to go even darker, you can go brown or whatever. And then you can, certainly where you get these very dark areas between flowers, you know, start to pop in those darker areas between the flowers as well. Oh, sorry, the leaves. So you're starting to create the shape between them, I suppose, is what you're doing, really. That's probably not that colour there. I'll go for this is why I actually have to test your colours, because sometimes they don't look anything like they're supposed to. So yeah, so you know, find the right colour for you. Actually, I'll use that one. That's all I want. And that helps to create the definition. Is to what we're looking for is the shadow between. And it might be the shadow between, like the leaf, you know, the one leaf and another one, like this one is underneath, so we can actually get in between that, the shape of the leaf on that one. Now we're not smudging that one in, we're actually just creating the definition with the edge of the pastel, so we can pop it on with quite some pressure, so it sticks itself in on the edge. So that's why, you know, we that very last bit where if you want a little bit more definition, we would do that with the pressure like we would once everything else is finished, because if we went in after it was finished and started blending it, all of that lovely lightness would be affected. So so yeah, this is where we need to be more mindful about how we're creating that. So you know, might even be able to create the shadow underneath the leaf, etc., where it curls, and it does start to make much more of a difference. So even on here where we've got the edge here of we've got this lightness of the edge here, if you want to put some shape back into it, you can do that. You know, again, is there any shadow? Are there any straight shadow areas? So all the time we're not looking for an outline, but we're looking for the shadows. Where can we see them? And all of those things together will help create a little bit more definition to the flowers. But it's difficult to see on one small patch, but it at least might give you confidence as you're working. So I would tend to do that once I've finished the whole thing. But that's because I know that the process will work, and I'm not going to be put off by it. So when you're first starting to use pastels, if you want to kind of go in and do it, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, so just keep working through that really, and getting them in. I'm going to get some of my foliage just really quickly popped in. Let's have a look. I'll move that one out. This one I've just borrowed. Right. So again, I'm going to go in with a shadow on this big leaf here.
Becky, have you got a lot of strong light on your paper?
Not really strong, just it's daylight actually. I haven't got a light on this at all.
Quite hard to get those colours, the shades, I think.
I'm just adding a light, slightly cooler tone here. That's more yellowy green, and this one's slightly more, just almost got a touch of bluey tone in it. Just because it's quite harsh on the actual photograph, the light on there is showing quite a cool colour. So you can vary it. You can pop on, if you see a slightly different green or blue, whatever, you can pop that on there quite easily.
Did you put that? Sorry to interrupt, but did you put those veins on first before you put the leaves on?
I tried to, but obviously, as we were saying, if you haven't got quite the definition that you want, you can obviously pop that on afterwards. Generally, I try and see where the shady areas are first and put them in. But, there are times where you think, oh, actually, I've missed that, or I want a little bit slightly more definition so I can see. So you can go back in and pop them on. Those particular ones there, I put on after. These ones I put on before.
Okay, thank you.
That's okay. So again, you can pop in things like these, the stalks, just in a tone that you think. And then I might, have a go. I think I'm happy with the leaves for the moment. And again, it might change once I've got some of the colours in. So again, even with pinks and things like that, have a little look at what you've got and give them a try first, because again, things look very, very different and even with a different tone background as well, they can look really different. So see what you've got, and you can, overlay things as well. So you could almost do, I'm thinking, oh, I'm not quite sure about that pink. You can always try another pink over the top and see, see what it does. Or just go with one that you really think, I really like that. I would always have a dark one. Obviously, because we're looking at the dark centers, and then we've got, you could almost go, if you wanted to, almost on the ready tone. That's not quite the right tone. So I think that's quite a good middle tone. That one's not quite the right pink for me. And you just keep looking through your set and see what you've got in there really. I did have a pinkish one. I think that's more. Don't know why that's natural. Let's see if I can see it underneath. Maybe it is that one. Let's have a little look. It's more lilac-y actually, that one. I thought I'd had a really light pink like this, light blue. No, I can't quite see that, so I'll use this one anyway. Because what we're wanting is the contrast in there. So again, I mean, you might not particularly be absolutely, you might not be sure exactly where this middle tone goes. You might want to just have a go, pop in some of these middle, you know, where the leaves are, petals are, some of the darker tones in there.
Do you use much white, Becky, on this?
No, not yet, because we've not had much white on the things we've done, have we? We've had very light coloured tones, but we've got enough of contrast here without actually adding white. I'm always very careful that I'm looking to see what is actually a white highlight. Like here is. So I'm looking then, what if I compare that to anything else on here, is there anything as light as that? So if you find your lightest that you think is white, you can always go and compare. You know, there might be some very lightness on the tips here, for example. So yeah, just kind of popping in some of these darker areas here. Creating the shape and definition a bit before, but again, we can add those extra bits in if we want to. These are slightly more pinky, say slightly more peachy colour, almost the tone. Let's have a look. Okay. So obviously then pop our lighter. And this is where you can create the texture with your pastel. You don't have to do any smudging or blending in here. You can just, you know, you can just give it a light touch with your finger just to set it a little bit, but you can really start to pop that definition in actually just by using your pastel like a pencil or like a brush, just to get some of the shape of those petals and things like that in there. And then going back to the question you just asked there, actually, you could then look on here and see where is the lightest tip. Is there anything? Because there is a touch of white, isn't there, almost. So you can then really highlight on your final layer just by using it carefully on the edge, just where you might see a real touch of the light hitting it in sections. Okay, and then that's why it makes a difference when you use it more sparingly. Yeah, we're just popping in. In some of these, and again, you know, picking out those highlights as well. You know, you can even wiggle your pastel as well to kind of create, you know, the edge if you've got more of a frilly edge on a flower or something like that. And then again, same principle we were just talking about. We can then go back in and add a little bit more definition to those. Again, with the shadow, we're just a bit, you know, we're just being mindful really. I'm going to go in just because of the tone of it with a pencil. So here, what I would suggest is you go, if you, whatever area you're working on and you want to put shadow, you want to put shadow into, say, the flowers, then just go in with a darker version of a similar tone that you've used in that area. So in here, I'd be going for kind of a darker green or brown in there to get that definition. In here, the shadow, I'd use just, you know, a similar colour to what we've got there, but I can go in a little bit more. We're just careful. Again, I'm not really smudging that in. I'm just doing exactly what you're saying, what we were saying earlier about, like, so it's not quite so, you know, we've got this edge, this definite definition to the sections. Just go in there. And you can see the difference already actually by doing that. You know, it does make a difference, doesn't it, to what we're doing. But yeah, looking for the shadows. Sometimes it's broken up, is that line. And again, it does create that sense of depth as well, doesn't it? And that's what we do, you know, when we do, all we're doing here is exactly the same as we do with acrylics or another medium where we're balancing. So we're looking for the balance. So if it's not dark enough, we go in and do a little bit. You know, the rules can be broken. It's just what we're mindful of on this way around is we're not muddying up the colours by going in and doing a big blend, especially if it's on a smaller piece. You know, we can just keep working in on there with the edge of your pencil or a pastel pencil. Let's see what else we've got. So I've got these here, I've just popped in. And we're just kind of following it around. But it's the nice thing about it is that something like this you can apply to pretty much any composition that you put together, any still life you can put together. It's the same principle as we're doing at the moment. You know, we're just being mindful of the shadows to create the depth, shadows between things, the deep areas inside the flowers. It needs to be a little bit more yellowy. And we're just kind of working our way around in that manner, really. Yeah, I might just kind of very carefully dab over the top so we're fixing it in, but you know, the pressure is enough to keep it down if we're confident with the kind of line and the mark that we put on. So if we work its way down the composition, you know, we can start to look at things like the soil in there, you know, getting that, make sure that's really deep, you know, the colour in there is dark, very dark. Of course, soil is, but it also is creating this sense of real depth in the plant pot, because it goes, you know, it's dark and it goes backwards in the plant pot. So that's, you know, another thing that we're doing there. And again, you can keep looking and say, is that dark enough? Do I need to go even darker with my shadow? It's just all a series of choices that we're making really all the time with the composition, with a still life. Okay, so again, you know, keep working through. There's your plant pot and everything. I tend to go for that because it's underneath this one, but this is where you can really start having some real fun with texture, because some of the plant pots, especially the pot ones, are lovely, and you get those lovely different colors on. So again, I'm still going to go in with a darker. I am mindful of continually, we're swapping over again now, so making sure that your fingers are clean there and dry as well, because you don't want to be doing it with a wet smudgy finger. And then finding a tone for the plant pot, a couple of tones. Okay, so that my darker. What else have we got in here? Oh, it is. That's the one. Slightly lighter. So again, I'll just start with the darkest, and I've even got like a line under here which is slightly darker than I've got. So I might even go in with a really dark brown for that, for getting this plant pot in here. This rim under there, and have a look. There might even be something like near the bottom between. Again, between the plant pots, you can get this edge quite deep. And underneath the tool, these are the kind of places where you'd naturally, because there's something else casting a shadow, where you'd find those darker areas really. And then you can start to get your other kinds of shadow in. So I'm still going to go in slightly darker here, because I've got you can also create a bit of shape with it if you want to. Now obviously my background is orange, so I could let that come through a little bit and use some of that colour on it, the lighter, if I wanted to. Again, we're just kind of looking at still the darker areas in this plant pot. And that definition, if you like, so that's a good example there where you lose a bit of definition with the darker here. That's fine, because we can pop that in near the end. Just making sure I've got this. And then again, we can use if you've got another slightly lighter one, you can start to get that. But then this is where you can start to actually add some really nice texture in. So you can start to think, right, I'm going to kind of, if this was a pot one, I'm going to start to create some of those dots and all those markings on the texture on the pot as well, or just totally blend it. And this is, again, it's like a good lesson in experimenting and exploring. What look do you like? And I would go a lighter colour again, see what we've got here. It's quite warm-ish colour. So again, going in with my kind of highlights here over the top. On this side of the pot. It's a bit over here. So we're just making these decisions all the time about where to put it. Might be slightly cooler colour. So I'm going to go for a more of a taupey colour over here because this is in the shadow. So that's quite helpful. To make it slightly, slightly less warm. And again, this is where you can go, right, let's have a look. Is there on the rim, right around this side, is there a bit of a highlight where just before it kind of steps down there? On the edge here where it's catching the light a little bit. So we're just making these decisions. And so, for example, this lighter colour, I would be very tempted. It's where you get those lovely markings. I'm pretending this is actually a pottery one. Do get some texture. Sometimes you get a nice green tone as well, don't you? A mossy green kind of colour as well on these pots where they've just greened with age. And then again, exactly the same as before, if you want to go in and put more definition in there, then you can pop it back in carefully where the shadows are, if that's what you want to do. Again, it can be loose, it can be more detailed. And again, I might think about this down this side here and at the edge of the top as well, making that a little bit more defined there. And there is a little bit of the edge of this plant pot at the top does look a tiny bit white. So that with the shadow again gives us the definition there. Okay, so we're just going, obviously we're going through element by element, aren't we? And then we can do the same with the tools. So again, we're going in with darks, lights, and again, when you've got things like this, you can see an obvious shadow between them. And then you can see some nice lines across. You can start to create the shape of the tools and things like that you can see. I'm going to go for a lighter, this lighter blue now. And again, we just, it can be, it can be quite textured what we're doing. I've missed a bit there, so I'm just going to pop that carefully back in. And things like colours of the spades and things like that are really quite interesting. So again, you've got a series of shadows here. And how dark you go is entirely up to you. You can just go, I've got like here a graphite. You can go to black if you think it is. It's just, and you get a series of really interesting shapes with it. So this spade, for example, you have these very interesting triangular shapes on there, and that's how we can show it's the metal. So I might go a bit lighter, just a bit of a lighter shade of grey, for example. Where is it? There it is. On the inside of this spade. But I'm going to pop my shadows in, the darker ones. There's one that goes down the middle. And all we're doing is creating a series of tones in here, that's all. And then we've got this obvious here, which I always find really interesting when you get like a big shape. It's a bit kind of a interesting shape down the bottom of here. And again, you can go, you know, look at the darkest tones. We've got a shape here again. Pop that darkest tone in. Whatever colour you choose. I mean, this, I have actually gone for black on this one, but I probably didn't need to. But I want the contrast to be nice and strong there. And then I'm going for this dark colour in here as well, because we've got this reflection look of then we can start to add some other colour. So that's where I probably would use this white over here. Now I'm putting that on separately because it's a separate shade, so I'm not really too worried about, you know, that getting muddy with everything else. Yeah, and then we're just continuing on with this mid-tone, aren't we? Getting those mid-tones in there. Another mid-tone, similar mid-tone here. Around these shapes. And again, you know, going back to if you're missing anything, you can make those a bit more defined. You get a little bit of a reflection of this pinky colour as well, but slightly darker, where you can see the handle. I think that's, or it might even be the flower. So I'm just going to make that a little bit pinky in the corner, because that's a lot about what you can see on a reflection. Your eye understands it somehow, it just does. And then, you know, going with your highlights. So what have you got? Is it white or is it another colour? I'm going to try light blue actually to start with, just to see the contrast. Let's see what happens there. And then you can go with an even lighter colour if you think. Okay. Let's go a bit further up, I think. So yes, I mean, so that's all we're doing. And again, going back to what, you know, the question about making it more defined, we can just do that. You know, look at the shadow underneath. Again, you know, we're not outlining it, we're looking at the shadows. There are plenty when you start to look. So those, you know, the darker areas and everything, our eye then knows what's going on when it just knows that there's a bit of that there's a spade there. You know, and then we can start to put the other elements of it. It's really interesting how the brain just knows these things. A lot of it's recognition. You know, because we've seen it before. So again, it's just looking for the tone that you want to go on the other side of that. And again, we can actually start, maybe I should have put these dark on in before, to be fair, but never mind. You can start to kind of create the shape of that, you know, some of these lines and these handles and things, as we've been doing in the other areas. kind of pull it through if you want to over the top, so that we've got a bit of this going on. And again, you know, we can just pop a bit more, get those where those shadows are going underneath this, going underneath. So there's a hole in that one, isn't there? And then obviously popping on some of the highlights as well, you know, because we've got the highlight kind of going up this side where the light catches this bit here, you can see that going up. So again, you can kind of wiggle your pastel and things and get a bit of that texture in if you want to. Going up. So again, we know, you know, it's just when we start doing that and you've just got all these shapes shoved together, you just think, no, it just doesn't look anything like it. But as we're going through and adding these other elements on, it really starts to pull, you know, pull the picture together. So obviously there's just the fork would work in exactly the same way. You know, adding on these different elements. Slightly darker, isn't it, in a lot of places? Because it's in the shadow of the plant pot and the spade. So the overall colour to start with is darker. But again, you know, exactly the same. Just building up those layers. I've made a bit of a, not left enough gap between there actually, but that's, I'm just going to use the colour in the background and just pop it back in, pop the shape back in with a lighter one here. Yeah, and then you again, even on there, you're starting to have a look at what other lighter, and there's not an awful lot of lighter ones on there. So that lighter one, you know, it just depends. So we can see the side of this. This here is slightly lighter, and it's exactly the same with what we've been saying. If you want to put a bit of definition back in, you can do that. You know, if there's anything else on there that you think I want to pop slightly lighter one in, you can even, I've got a bit of a blue one here. Pop that lighter blue on top, but again, I'm pressing down quite a bit. Okay, so yeah, my fork needs a little bit of work on it, but again, you know, we can just go back in and get some of those shadows put in, so it creates a bit more of the shape there. Anyway, you can see those areas quite dark, aren't they, between much bit darker between the this bottom part here. So we're just going, you know, we're just really going through and adding elements, aren't we, to it. I'll finish off the plant pot actually, because that comes a bit further down. Okay, so, you know, obviously if I was to go back, I'd probably do a little bit more work on here. But ultimately, you know, we just have a little experiment with all the different tones, especially with the metal and everything, and the texture. There's nothing stopping you using your pastel exactly, you know, to express yourself. And in with your, you know, anything that feels natural coming out of your hand is a really, really good way to go with. So if you like to dot things on, then dot things on over the top. Just nice to have a base in which to work through, and work with the colours and everything, and the tones and the contrasts between darks and lights, and then add as much definition or as little definition as you wish, and what feels comfortable, really. So we'll take the last pause there. And that should hopefully really help with all of these, thinking about all the things when you're working on a still life.